All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. I want to start with a big thank you to our audience, particularly our US audience. It is a federal holiday, and some of you all are eschewing rest and recognition of Juneteenth to join us to hear about the Undivide Project and all of the work that we're doing. So, in case you hadn't figured it out, my name is Monica, and I founded this organization to help communities who are or underconnected or otherwise divested from digital infrastructure to join us in this increasingly digital society, but also use those tools to help build climate resilience and adaptation. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. But I also have two guests, two wonderful colleagues and allies with me who are also doing important work in this space. And I want to acknowledge them and hear more about what they are doing in their respective areas. So I'm going to start with Mr. Kevin Blanchard, who is joining us from the United Kingdom.
Hello, Monica. Hello, Reggie, and hello, audience. Thank you so much for having me. Um, my name is Kevin Blanchard, as Monica just explained, and I'm director of an organization called DRI Dynamics. And we focus on ensuring inclusive representation, visibility, engagements within disaster risk reduction policy and practice with a primary focus of giving communities who are traditionally excluded from the policymaking process a seat at the table, for want of a better term, and working with community groups, grassroots organizations, national governments, international NGOs, etc., to ensure that that happens. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
And Mr. Ferreira, or Dr. Ferreira, excuse me.
No, Monica, you're good. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Good afternoon. First off, happy belated birthday to Monica for yesterday on Juneteenth. Hope you had a great day. And welcome to the audience. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today and just hear what we're doing on our end of the world, and also great to finally connect with Kevin. And thank you, Monica, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you both for joining me and for supporting this work. So I want to start with a couple of figures, and I'm going to explain that this is a global phenomenon. In Europe, 25% of Europeans are not connected in any way, shape, form to the internet. And for my friends who live in the EU, it should not surprise you that this is Central and what we used to call Eastern Europe, which is a broad bit of geography depending on your political perspective. But the way that it trends should not surprise anyone. 350 million people in Southeast Asia are or underconnected to the internet. And as we know from any pictures that we see, if you Google any country in that area, you look at their disaster and climate change risk, and it's outsized relative to the rest of the continent, to the rest of the world. In the United States, 60% of all African Americans live in the same 10 states, and those same 10 states are the most at risk of climate change and sea level rise and extreme heat. And so, what we're trying to understand and what we suspect is similar to other public infrastructures and public goods. The same kinds of communities are being divested and overlooked over and over again. And when we have these conversations about the risk of increasing inequity because of the digital divide broadly, or what it means to participate in all these digital spaces, we really have to ask the question like, who are we leaving behind and how are we leaving them behind? Okay. And to be honest, I've gotten some pushback. People have asked me, why are you doing this when the president is rolling out this big infrastructure bill here in the United States? It's meant to close the digital divide. We're not going to leave anyone behind. But the truth of the matter is that it's more than just saying, looking at a map and saying, there's no broadband here, and there the conversation ends. It's a question of, can we even connect them from a technical and infrastructure point of view? And in some places, no. Reggie can attest that down in Louisiana, there are some communities where the geography just is not going to work for broadband. And those are the communities who need the tools to build climate resilience the most. And I'm sure that this is not the case. Sometimes the things that we know intuitively or just from common sense require research and analytics to back up the things that these communities already know so that they can get the attention that they need. And so that is what this was born out of. We have got some great partners that are helping us. I'm excited that in a couple of weeks, we will have a rollout of maps for DC and parts of Louisiana. And excuse me for our international audience, I'm referring to Washington, DC, the metropolitan area, the capital of the United States. And yes, there are communities in the capital of the United States that are this way, where you can see communities are unconnected or underconnected, have environmental justice problems, and are at high risk of climate impacts. Okay. And so that should be out by the 1st of July. We're finalizing the maps, and so on all of our social media, we'll be rolling that out so that you can have a look at them. We want these to be tools for communities who can advocate for themselves to ask for the kinds of solutions that they want. I am not of the mind that all policymakers are wanting to ignore this problem. They just may not have a tool that they can use to make good policy. So it's going to be public for any policymaker or fellow advocates to use. The other thing that we're concerned about with is what this underconnectedness means in terms of data collection to get the good information we need to make good policy and make good decisions for these communities, right? Because in the same areas that I just talked about are underconnected, we found out many of these places, the information that we need to really understand their climate risk is on pen and paper. It's not in a database where we can collect it and analyze it and share it. They don't have a way of giving really good community science back to researchers and policy writers. Yeah, so we have those things. And then there's something, Kevin, that you and I both know quite well, is the bias in the collection methods and some of the dangers that that can bring to these communities. So Undivide is looking at all of these things with, and also acknowledging that there's some really great work also going on with partners and colleagues. And so I would love it if you could talk more about the report that you have coming out from your organization and some of the things that you've looked at and some of the risks that you've uncovered in doing this work.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so great to have such a discussion that really meets the kind of the ambitions and the goals of so many people within the community. And before we go on, sorry, Monica, I should say yes, happy birthday, happy belated birthday. Sorry, I should have said that in my introduction. Reggie kind of put me to shame there. Sorry. And my second point would be, I absolutely 100% agree. I think there are very few policymakers, officials who are purposefully ignoring or kind of excluding particular communities from their work. I think it is very much a case that, as I'll go and touch on briefly in a moment, the data doesn't exist for that for those policies to be developed in a way that's truly inclusive. Or it's just that you are sitting in amongst a group that doesn't represent the broadest aspects of society. You're sitting in a room with all white men. We are not the best people to understand and to appreciate and to recognize the capacities, the skills and the knowledge and the vulnerability that exists in wider society. So I think there is a whole kind of range of issues that are very kind of entrenched, both in policy development but also in kind of wider society, that I think probably needs unpicking, and I'm sure that could be a whole different hours session, I'm sure. But yes, my report. So the report launched today. It's talking, it's framed around the idea of hyper-marginalized communities. And for those who might not have heard that term before, hyper-marginalized community would be someone who is, for example, within what we would know as a traditionally marginalized group, so an ethnic minority, a sexual agenda minority, someone with a disability, but because of some other aspect of their life, kind of an interconnectedness of risk, of exposure, of vulnerability, they are kind of in an even more precarious position in the aftermath of a disaster or before a disaster. So what we have tried to do within this report is actually understand how that particular group of people who are even further removed from policy development, from engagement, from inclusion, from capacity building, etc., than a traditional marginalized person, how they are kind of considered, recognized within data collection, within data analysis and data storage. So we look at things like security, the kind of security, particularly in countries whereby, taking, for example, if you're a gay man in certain parts of the world, that has really quite negative impacts on your day-to-day life in terms of kind of the legality of your your existence even. And in the aftermath of a disaster, it may well be that you're unable to access certain aids, certain medicine, etc., because you have a kind of a cultural, societal, legal barrier to get access to that assistance and that help. So this report tries to unpack some of that and tries to kind of question what we as policymakers, professionals, DRR researchers, etc., can do. And we provide a number of recommendations around what we should be doing as good allies, as good policymakers, as people who want to see a change where, disaster risk reduction, resilience building, climate change adaptation, all the kind of the key buzzwords that we see going around so much at the moment are truly inclusive, and it's not just a tick box exercise that we kind of go through as a procedural approach. And that's kind of the crux of the report that we've launched. It was developed by myself and my colleague Holly Segler, and please feel free to go online and have a look at that. But thank you very much for asking about it, Monica.
Yeah, I absolutely will. And also I'll flag, as we're talking about the launch, we're on all channels. We're here on LinkedIn Live. We're also on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We are on Twitter. And there's also a YouTube channel where this live is being simulcast as well. Please look at the Undivide Projects channels. Also, please look at DRR Dynamics, where you can find Kevin's report. You can also find where we did a study looking at the nature of data collection and problems with veracity in marginalized, and what I love the term hyper marginalized communities that we're going to post. And then we also did case studies comparing Baltimore and Puerto Rico. We chose those intentionally because we wanted to look at what all of these things mean in a deep urban area, the community within a community. But then also we wanted to look at a small island and to understand how those dynamics work in a small island. So we'll be posting all of those. And then Kevin will also link to your report. Because again, when we're talking about quote unquote digital divide issues, and hopefully we can find some better language and nomenclature to talk about this, because that doesn't quite capture all of the nuance of what we're talking about. We can dig deeper into all of this work to better understand it. I want to flag something that you said when you talked about who I'm sitting with. So externally, let's have a conversation about allyship and anti-imperialism, shall we? It looks like I'm sitting with two white men. Let's just say it out loud. But what you're seeing is a woman of African descent who grew up in the United States with a lot of access to wonderful education, with a lot of access to government resources and political influence, right? Is my marginalization the same as someone of a similar genetic makeup elsewhere in our society or elsewhere in the world? I am looking at someone who is from South Africa, who grew up under apartheid in circumstances that I could not imagine being born and grown up in the United States. I'm talking to someone who is in the United Kingdom, who has his own intersections that I can't understand coming from my perspective. And so when we're asking these questions about allyship, particularly on social media, we're starting to get into this place where we paint what is called the cisgender white male in very broad strokes. And there are many who are giving us this example of being destructive, but that's not necessarily true. The truth is that when we're dealing with these things, we come with a rich variety of perspectives, and allyship and perspectives take on so many different contours and textures, that the importance of understanding that, knowing that we all need to go, and we need to go together, and we need to go right now, is very important. So I really would love, Reggie, you haven't gotten the chance to speak, so I'd like for you to speak, and then Kevin, to talk about these intersections and allyships and why we need to bring that into our approaches to working with others and working in communities. So Dr. Ferreira, if you will, please begin, and then Kevin, if you would.
Thank you, Monica.
Follow up.
So you did point out the elephant in the room, there's two white males. I think it starts with just being self-aware, and especially when we work in communities that don't speak like us, that don't look like us, that we leave our bias at the door. That's probably the most important. That's what we're trying to teach our students at the academy. They're actually aware, that self-awareness, but also, if we're saying that we work in disaster science and in disaster risk reduction, at the end of the day, we want to create safer communities. And the only way we can do that is by providing equitable access, So where does that start? And it's actually having deeper conversations, of diving deep, our field started out, with Wisner and co, actually from the UK, about addressing root causes, and I think we're not at that stage where we're actually addressing root causes. But also like talking about reconciliation, especially in the United States, where today is Juneteenth, but I can promise you, if you ask a lot of Caucasian white Americans, they don't know what the day is about, or when you talk about the day, they just shrug their shoulders. So I think in terms of creating equity and equitable access, we have to have the so-called uncomfortable conversations, but dive deep, addressing the root causes, because otherwise we're just going to have this repetitive door or rolling door that comes around, and we're not going to be able to actually strive to achieving disaster risk reduction. And I mean, I've experienced it in South Africa. I've done some work in Mozambique, where we've seen it as well, where the root causes are not being addressed. And until that happens, unfortunately, I do think, and it's not me being pessimistic, we're just going to have the same issues over and over again. So yeah, that's my take.
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree, Reggie. And I should probably clarify, like my comment before was probably slightly flippant in that, I wasn't necessarily saying that all white cisgender men are bad by any stretch. I identify as cisgender myself. I'm clearly white. But as you mentioned, Monica, I do have my own intersecting kind of areas that have made my life maybe slightly more challenging or slightly more, have different aspects. I identify as queer, so there will be aspects of my life that are different to everyone else's on this call. So yeah, I 100% agree. I think trying to leave those biases outside when you are doing work like we do, our goal as DRR resilience professionals is really to try and keep everyone safe, or as safe as they possibly can be. And I think to do that in an effective way, you do need to recognize that you aren't going to have all the answers. I do not know what a certain part of the community is going to have in terms of their capacities, in terms of their knowledge, and we need to recognize that. And I mean, it sounds like a massive cliche, but like the idea of this kind of we are all in this together, and we should kind of be moving forward together. I absolutely agree, and that the foundation of that statement, I think, is absolutely correct. I think where it starts to get slightly more complicated, I'm sure everyone on this call will agree, is the actual reality of that. And that kind of brings us nicely back to the digital divide, Monica, and yes, in theory, it would be lovely if we had kind of this utopic world where everyone was kind of in it together, and we all had access to the same systems and the same privileges as everyone else. But the reality is very different to that. And I think for me, being a good ally, and I'll be quiet in a minute because I realize I'm rambling, but for me, being a good ally is literally doing that kind of very real thing of taking a step back and listening, as opposed to just kind of wanting to present solutions and want to present answers all the time. It should be about us listening to communities and understanding the capacities and the knowledge and the skills and the the resources that these communities bring to the table, and using those and learning from those. So sorry, I'll be quiet now. I'll pop myself on mute before I say any more.
I think, first of all, you were not rambling. It was all wonderful and rich, and we should not be on mute because this is a conversation and everyone's contributions mean so much. I really hope we get to the place we can just jump in. And listening to communities and what they want, I think, is so important when we're talking about these digital issues, because woven into this new way of doing things is an inherent mistrust of institutions. And all of us, again, have experience in having our own mistrust of institutions, as well as working with communities who mistrust institutions. Reggie and I are connected to large universities that have bring their own baggage into communities. Before he and I, no matter what our intentions are, before we even open our mouths in communities, it brings a certain amount of baggage with it. Here in the United States, we see ourselves on television, and I know that you all are seeing us, and we're pushing our definition of democracy to the edges of its limits. This is the way that I'm going to put it. But some communities have long histories of government not only not working for them, but working against them. And that has to be overcome when you're trying to find solutions for them. Because as we said, not of the belief that all policymakers are ill-intentioned, but the overexposure to different structures that don't have the best intentions all play out in a community. And then when we're talking about digital issues, we're dealing with an aspect of society that, because of the divide, is so foreign to a lot of people, and how to access that only magnifies that mistrust that's already there. So if we want to bring people up to a place that where they can participate, how do we look at that? Like in your work, what are some of the ways that you've dealt with this inherent mistrust in institutions? So I will allow you all to jump in as you feel free, and then I'll talk about mine at the end. I like to go last.
I guess I can jump in. So in Louisiana, obviously there's a legacy that comes over hundreds of years, but I'm sort of going to jump forward to Hurricane Katrina. And so I started at Tulane end of 2012. And one of my biggest challenges doing research in the community and doing community outreach is actually building community trust, because there's folks in the past, especially higher education institutions, that's come in and really misused and broke the trust of communities. So that's something difficult to overcome. So just stepping back, higher education institutions need to do a better job, not just where we say we train students, but we as faculty, we as researchers, we as staff also need to go through culturally sensitive training. Because at the end of the day, I've heard of so many studies, where communities participate, but the communities never know the end result. And how disrespectful is that for a community? That's a form of exploitation. That's just uncalled for. So just stepping back, we need to do a better job. And this is not just in the United States, across the globe. Again, backtracking to my past in South Africa, I was fortunate enough that my mom was a PhD as well, and that we're involved with research studies as well. And oftentimes, especially folks from the European Union would come in with project ideas, but we tell the community what they should do instead of asking the community what they want. And it's the same with the research piece as well. So just stepping back, and I know that's something we can't solve overnight, but that is something that's definitely needed. And then tapping into the local knowledge, just piggybacking on what Kevin had mentioned earlier, communities know best, what's best for them, so definitely respecting that, but also being an ally and linking said communities to resources and making it accessible. Don't break down the barriers. And I'll talk about a project, Monica, and I'm involved in a little bit later, but making it accessible, making it easy for folks to apply for funding. But yeah, I'll stop. Now I'm rambling.
Lots of rambling happening on today's call. Now, sorry, Monica, if I can just add something just very quickly. So it's really great that we're having this discussion, and I think it reminds me. I'm not sure whether either of you have been engaged with this actually. Monica, I think you might have done. Reggie, I'm not sure about you, but there's this group of kind of academics and professionals working within the disaster sector who have come up with this kind of accord that really kind of answers some of these questions, or tries to at least kind of have this discussion around some of these questions. Because, one of our concerns, and I've been involved with this process for a while now, is that you tend to have these Western research organizations, universities, academics, etc., going into these countries, kind of extracting all of this knowledge and all of this expertise, and then being paid obscene amounts for that as well. I mean, we all know that none of these projects are cheap, from our institutional level down. And what this kind of this accord and this manifesto aims to do is actually start to question why that's happening, and also provide suggestions and steps on how we can change that. I'll put a link in the chat for anyone who wants to see more about it, but it's under the Radix Radical Interpretations of Disasters kind of forum, I guess, and then there's a very specific page that's linked to the accord and the manifesto that kind of goes through some of those points and actually talks about how how this kind of this industrial complex of disaster research is effectively going in and kind of stealing for want of a better term, stealing a lot of this kind of indigenous, particularly knowledge, and global South researchers, academics, who are doing this stuff anyway on a day-to-day basis. But it takes a London-based organization or a Washington-based organization for somehow for it to get that funding or that recognition that it might not get elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. Thank you for bringing that up. You said so many things that resonate. So many great things that resonate. As I'm sitting here in my head. So I think I'd like to go backwards. Radix is wonderful. And the root of that is the word radical, which is sometimes captured in a negative way. But we're talking about sometimes you need radical change. You need to think entirely outside of the norm. And that is really what this work and what that group is about. And so I'm happy to lift them up. There are other groups within the complex that are doing things like creating journal opportunities to invite underrepresented scholars or deliberately not represented scholars into publications and to encourage more joining of so-called Western or Global North scholarship with Global South scholarship or underrepresented scholarship. And then there are other conversations around funding. And that's one of the ones that's really a tough nut to crack because we're talking about anti-imperialism, we're talking about bias. I won't say the name of the organization, but I had conversations around doing community work, capacity building. So we've done this work, we've trained the community in how to write grants. We're talking about advocacy. They've got a wonderful plan for something that they want to apply for. And the philanthropic officer is asking the real question, not coming from a bad place, coming from a place of not really having unpacked bias and examining why she's answered these questions is, well, why do they want to do this? Because organization X, a majority representing organization, is in the neighborhood doing this work. Or why do they want to build this app? Because this enlists a number of tech companies are building this app. And so the philanthropic officer just couldn't even conceive of a community coming up with its own ideas without the support or with a partnership or the acknowledgement, seal of approval, if you will, from a larger organization. And so how do we overcome that particular type of institutional bias? It says like, look, some of us have written, worked about, evangelized, if you will, about community-led projects and bringing indigenous knowledge into our work. And here we have communities that have done it, right? And I'm going to rant a little bit. Here in the United States, we have all of these pipeline projects, right? We can name them no matter what discipline you're in. There is some pipeline project to bring underrepresented scholars from discipline X or underrepresented practitioners from discipline X or Y. And so we send young people through these programs, but they're not getting hired or they're not getting cited or their work isn't getting funded. And so it's like these communities have done the work. They have the PhDs, the MDs, the JDs, the business owners, and they put together their own plan. And then you're questioning whether they have the capacity or the intellect to handle the money that they're asking for properly without being paired with another organization. And so to that, I say is that we also have to challenge these norms in funding institutions. Right? So it is the waiting and allowing the community to lead, but it's challenging these institutions and getting them to understand that not only do you have scholars and researchers, because we're talking mostly about academics, but if we talked about, say, emergency management practitioners or climate scientists, there are people with those qualifications in the communities that are also doing the work. So you get many of these communities, the richness of the theory, the richness of the practical experience, and then the lived experiences of the communities. We have in Puerto Rico and Central America, where I do a lot of work, like there are people who have been managing the environment for millennia. We believe that with our 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years of training, we somehow know better.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
That we are somehow more worthy of receiving exactly what you said, Kevin, these obscene amounts of funding. You have millions of dollars going into this research, just not finding its way into the communities, right? So I think challenging those institutions is another part of it. One other thing that I'd love to hear you all's comments back on that, so please comment back on that. But then also, Reggie, you want to talk about the project that you're doing, and then Kevin, I know you have another project, so please, I'd like to hear your response to my rant, but then also I want you both have like some real groundwork that reflects of the kinds of things that we're talking about here.
I don't think I have a clear-cut answer to your statement just now, Monica.
I was hoping to piggyback on yours, Reggie. So.
Reflecting back to you, Kevin. I do think we need a paradigm shift, and if not now, it probably will never happen. Or we'll just again be faced with the same issues. And I'll go back to earlier statement is addressing the root causes. And I mean, if we have this approach in DRR and in resilience, that we want to create a safe environment, then we really need to step up. And if we are not involved directly with a project and we see a misstep, then you need to speak up. You need to call it out. We have to get to a stage where we are able to call out when there's a misstep. I mean, there's ways to do it, but we have to pinpoint what's being done wrong and speak up. Otherwise, I mean, if you are just keeping quiet, you're just as culpable. I don't want to get too philosophical on a Monday morning, but yeah. In terms of what we're doing here in Louisiana, Monica and I received funding from Walmart.org. We're basically going to be working with 10 grassroots organizations, underserved grassroots organizations impacted by Hurricane Ida. And we're taking a different approach. They're actually going to help us define the program. So we're going to be going through group concept mapping, where our main focus is basically to address barriers. And we've left barriers pretty broad. I mean, the main overarching one is to disaster financing and how to access financing resources. But really, what are the barriers? So the community organizations will go through a easy and accessible platform for them to apply and be part of our program. And then they're going to help guide us, based on their needs assessment, what their needs are. And then we're going to cater a program that could be replicable across the country. But, really with the premise of that the community tells us what they need and want. And ideally, we are hopeful that an end product for each of the 10 grassroots organizations will be an actual grant proposal that we work with them, that they can submit and, hit the ground running and actually ensure that resources reach, our underserved communities, our BIPOC communities, our First Nation people who's been left out and haven't really had the avenues to access the resources. Sometimes hear stories of there's post-disaster funding available of hundreds of millions of dollars, and it goes back to government coffers or organizations because the community just didn't know how to access it. So again, we have to do a better job in ensuring that the process is accessible for all to participate.
And Kevin, you have a summit coming up later this year.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So as part of my non-DRR Dynamics work, I also run the No Natural Disasters Twitter accounts and websites. So for anyone who's on the call who might not have heard of that, so the idea is that the term natural disasters is misleading because a disaster is caused when a hazard interacts with human settlement, society, community, etc. And it's our failure as humans and as a species to stop that hazard turning into a disaster that creates that disaster. So really, there's no natural process there that creates that disaster. That the hazard absolutely is natural, but the resulting disaster isn't. And there's a whole kind of campaign that's been going on for decades in terms of academic literature and research. But just recently, maybe since about 2017, we've kind of taken this and we've tried to democratize some of this research and this discussion to make it kind of more widely available to everyone. Again, kind of this trying to address some of these aspects of digital divide, because before this Twitter account, before the website, a lot of this research was behind paywalls on journals, etc. And that's not accessible to a number of people unless you've got some kind of institutional affiliation. So we've tried to do that, and we are having our first ever conference in September, on the 22nd of September. That's really just it's basically an excuse for everyone who's got any kind of interest in disaster research, practitioners, researchers, academics, whoever, who have a position on the No Natural Disasters campaign, whether they're against it, whether they think that actually there are things as natural disasters, or whether they're like me, an advocate for, and yourself, Monica. Monica will be speaking during the conference as well, which is fantastic. We're really excited to have you. so that's coming up in September, and hopefully, there'll be lots and lots of information that's being released over the next couple of weeks. But Reggie, I was really interested to hear you talk about, being guided by the community, and that's something that I don't think many academics, many government organizations, departments, etc. It takes a kind of a quite a I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Like it's a really great way, and it should be the only way we should do our research. But it's almost like we're basically giving away power. And obviously, humans fundamentally we don't like to do that. We're reluctant to kind of give away any kind of knowledge or anything that could kind of help us in the long term. So I'd be really interested to hear kind of how you've managed to get these funders to agree to that, because that's something I would like to know. Like, how can I do that? How can I get these donors and people to give up that power and actually pass that over to the communities and people who are actually going to be benefiting from it? Sorry, Monica, I'm asking questions like I'm the host.
I can tell you, Reggie, that the person of interest is actually watching now, so we can go ahead.
I guess it was a miracle. No, I think our intentions are clear, but also just to step back, is to leave ego at the door. At the end of the day, I do think ego plays and again, I'm philosophical today, and I apologize for those of you who are watching, but I mean, ego can really derail things. And at the end of the day, again, I'll go back. If we're saying we're in DRR and resilience, we do it at the end of the day for the community. Yes, there is probably some subconscious bias where, we feel good about ourselves when we do good, in the resilience literature, volunteering is one of the big things. I mean, we're not volunteering here, but I do think ego should be left at the door and really edify the benefit for the community, if you're doing this, but also is there a benefit for you and the community? So vice versa. So addressing that, but again, just being self-aware. I guess that's for me the biggest thing. That's where missteps happen. If you're not self-aware, I believe the majority of people, 99.9% of people, have good intentions, but those good intentions, if you're not self-aware, can derail a lot of things and actually cause more harm and cause more damage, especially when you're working in communities that have been marginalized over time. Then it's just another drop in the bucket of distrust that comes about. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Kevin, but it's just being clear with your intentions. Yeah. Philosophical Monday.
Well, I mean, what better day?
I'm going to ask you a philosophical question at the end, so you're in the right frame of mind. I'm going to tell you about some other projects that Undivide has coming up, but I do want to acknowledge in the chat, we've got some comments here. Thank you to our participants, and please continue to put things in the comments. We can see them in the last couple of minutes we have together. We'll respond to them. But Jason Ferguson has written, we must establish as a foundational truth that the disparity we see and its development and sustainment has been deliberate. The work that you all are discussing and are committed to is in itself a war declaration against the structures and systems that have leveraged racial violence, and I would include gender-based violence as well, or gendered violence, as a tool for power. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for making that comment here on LinkedIn, because I know we're probably bringing in some nomenclature and some ideas into this broader platform that probably aren't discussed in this way, but that's what we're here for. And I appreciate that. And that will lead up to my last question, but very quickly, Kevin, I know that you are looking for speakers from the Global South for your summit. So again, please post in the chat how people can sign up, because I know from emails and things that I've received, and thank you for the outreach from people all over the world for doing this. Thank you both for sharing them in your networks, and thanks to everyone that's joined in. Please join the summit. That's the purpose, is to hear from all kinds of people and ideas. If I may be so bold, Kevin, please join.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Monica. Yeah, I totally agree with what you've just said, and I probably should have said that myself when I was giving the introduction, but I was too busy thinking of all the different things I needed to talk about.
Monica understands the assignment.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness someone does.
The other thing that we are doing is that for the Undivide project coming up, my big goal for 2023, and I shared this with Reggie, is to do another mapping project that really gives us a true sense of where people are underconnected. And so we're going to want to hear from people in other places in the United States. Again, going back to this, it's not whether you have broadband or not, and there the conversation ends. It's what is actually happening in the community and what kinds of uses and opportunities are communities missing out on because of this. And so we want to do some more mapping. So we're looking for funders and supporters in the United States. Our donate button is up on our website at undivideproject.org, so don't be shy about clicking on it. And then globally, we have some potential partners in mind that can help us with the volunteering and the citizen science, because again, we know the numbers, 350 million people in Southeast Asia, but what are their challenges and their needs, and what kinds of things are we missing in having good information to join within a due policy? What kind of information are they missing to fully participate in all these structures that we're talking about, or protest against them or complain about them, as the case may be? This just creates very much a big black spot. And so we want to do these two mapping and awareness projects going from the end of this year into 2023 to build that out so that we have these tools. And so again, knowing that we have a broad audience right now, I want to invite people to participate and join in the thought process in structuring this. I see Eric Wood asking for the link to Radix. Eric, we posted it in the chat, so it's right up there. It's Radix with an X online.org, so you can go and find that and look farther up in the chat and you'll be able to see it. So we're talking about, we're sitting here in the United States. It's Juneteenth's federally recognized holiday. It was yesterday. It was my birthday. And so thanks to Mom and Dad for kind of nailing that particular incident, giving what I do. But here's a federally recognized holiday. And we've had this conversation, Reggie. Kevin, you're online. I'm sure you've seen some of the antics that happen around American holidays and sort of redirecting people to think about the true intention of it. Jason, thank you for your comment, because we're talking about racial violence as a tool of power and under communities' divestment. It's important to think about on this day, we're talking about celebrating a holiday where it was 2.5 years after emancipation that people actually found out that they were emancipated. And that's an important historical note when we're talking about communities that cannot fully participate in society, even societies that we like to say are free. Not feeling safe to access government structures or certain even private institutions is not real freedom. And so while we're waxing philosophical about our work in these last couple of minutes, for me, it is looking at the Undivide project and some of my other work as a tool to bring people closer to that. Because to say you have public Wi-Fi or you have internet, but you don't know how to access funders, or on a very personal level, you don't know how to access, if you're an elderly person, Social Security benefits, or you can't get education online, that's not really living in a free society. And that needs to be corrected. And so I would like to end this with each of you adding your own philosophical perspective about the space and time that we're sitting in right now and the work that we're doing.
I guess I'll jump in.
I hope you would.
Yeah, Monica, this is probably just to confirm what you're saying, but I mean, part of the Walmart.org project, we're doing a deep dive currently in the literature to see what are the barriers. And lack of knowledge, lack of training for underserved communities to resources is one of the biggest barriers, so that should be a starting point again, and it should be a bottom up, top down approach, where everyone comes to the table. I don't think folks really realize, apart from, I want to be politically correct, from us in the disaster science community, what's coming. Like next week in New Orleans, we're going to have our warmest, hottest week on record. So again, we have to start and talk the talk and walk the walk. I don't have a clear-cut answer to your question, but again, it's just now's the time. Where do we start? I'm hopeful that we can have a follow-up conversation to today in a couple of months. But yeah, and it's also linking people. It's building out the networks. Connecting communities to opportunities they wouldn't have had in the past. Especially from a political structure standpoint. But also, and I'm going to leave it at this, we should start and keep our politicians accountable. you know, when it comes to election time, they're always on the scene and they want to showboat. But yeah, we really need to start and do that.
Yeah, I would second the politician's point. I think it kind of leads quite nicely into what I wanted to say. I mean, I think, you know, COVID-19 has been really the first truly global crisis that we've experienced as a species in the age of the internet, and I think it's highlighted a huge number of discrepancies, of inequalities, of issues really with the idea and the current system of information sharing, of, you know, ensuring that people have access to information and to knowledge and to capacity that will help them in these really difficult times. And I think, you know, this is going to sound more like a political rant than a kind of philosophical kind of debate. But my, you know, my overwhelming feeling is that the system that we currently have isn't working. Like, I know obviously that's probably quite clear from the discussion we've had, but, you know, the idea that even to access free Wi-Fi, like if we are to take kind of, you know, the digital divide at its most kind of basic premise, and, you know, if someone does have a mobile phone or a tablet that they're able to access the internet, even to be able to access that internet, they need to have this whole kind of, you know, this whole kind of setup behind that process. They need to be able to use the things. They need to have the training. They need to have an email address. They need to have sometimes a debit card or a credit card. You know, there's this whole kind of ecosystem behind even, you know, something supposedly free like the internet. And I think that's kind of, for me anyway, that's kind of one of the really big things that's come out of COVID, is the idea that access to knowledge and access to information should be a basic human right. It should be something that everyone has access to, regardless of their status, regardless of their country. But we really have seen that actually those people who do have access to, you know, the internet and mobile phones and that kind of technology, or cell phones for a US audience, you know, they're the ones who have been able to cope in a much more informed and better way than people who don't. And I think, you know, at the very basis of all of this, it's really that the system we're currently in isn't working. Something needs to change. I don't know what that is, and I don't have the answers, but I think, you know, the way we have kind of commoditized information, I think is dangerous, and if that continues, is you know, that's a really worrying trend.
It really is. We are, in my opinion, very quickly spiraling towards a global society. And, you know, sometimes sci-fi warns us of what's to come. Good sci-fi is never. I was listening to the Ready Room for my Star Trek geeks out there. You know what the show is. Where it says good sci-fi is never about the future. It's a commentary on what's happening now. And very quickly, and we have a moment in time right now to do something about it, spiraling towards people who have access in these ecosystems and the resources to pay for them. We'll find a way to adapt and even live comfortably. Some people will profit off of it and develop even more wealth and access. And then some of the people, to be brutally honest, will be left outside to burn while serving those people who are in a different part of society. And so we really need to be ready to embrace those hard truths in order to make the kinds of radical, per our friends at Radix, interventions to stop that from happening. At least do what we can to help those communities that need it. So I want to leave this here. Thank you both so much. I heard at least 3 or 4 more conversations where we could do this again. We'll talk offline about how we should keep doing this. For those of you who are watching or people who didn't get to participate and will see the recording, we are going to be back this evening, Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. I'm at home in New Orleans, not too far from Reggie, if you couldn't tell, 5 p.m. Central Time. Depending on where you are abroad, it might be 6 or 7 in the morning or close to midnight. Sorry to my friends in the EU. We'll be on Twitter Spaces. So look at the Undivide Project's Twitter Space. We will be talking again about some of our work, but also having a more free-flowing conversation about some of the challenges around this theme. So thank you all again. Please look at DRR Dynamics or look up at Kevin Blanchard. Look at Tulane Darla to find out what we're doing at Tulane. And of course, please follow all of the Undivide Projects channels, and also pay attention to all of our pages for when we'll have the next one of these events. So thank you so much to everyone who was viewing and adding comments. And I won't say goodbye. I'll say we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.